You probably know a saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Now this means that if you find you're in discourse with someone and it becomes what we might call an argument, there's a tendency for at least one of the two parties to start to try and monopolize the speaking, so that the other puts in an objection or a counter, but he's stopped partway through his explanation because the now defending party rushes in and hasn't got the patience to hear the rest of this discourse out. Well, the futility of argument, isn't it? We can browbeat people with words, but they won't go away very convinced at all, only convinced that you don't know the argument from their point of view, because they didn't listen, or they didn't let you develop it, or they kept going round in circles that avoided what you understand to be a vital essence to the correct understanding of things. The futility of argument is that at least one of the parties ends up not really listening, if not both, to the other. And at least one of the parties is convinced he knows the answer. Now you may say, well, you very often have the situation where both parties are convinced they know they have the answer, it's just they have different answers, different understandings. Now if we try to get some objective distance from the matter for a moment, let me suggest that, well, there are other factors that should be taken into account. We have two people. Now, the moment I say that, oh my goodness. People are not necessarily rational, or they might be, or they should be. Their view of rationality might be quite different. Their hopes, fears, wants, and experiences, way of reasoning, you name it, values. And having put it like that, we could say immediately, I think, almost without hesitation, that all of such could well complicate the way the argument goes between the two of them. And we hope it doesn't become violent. It may mean they don't talk to each other ever again. That's a sort of passive violence, isn't it? In other words, socially, this can be a disaster. And now, of course, it becomes blatantly obvious too, isn't it, that we may have far more important matters to be concerned about than whether we agree on this particular issue that we're arguing about. Not least of which is possibly showing up rather violently in the argument, as it might develop into, in that we're not considerate of the other person in the way we would like them to be considerate of us. Well, that's going to make any discourse extremely difficult, isn't it, if that's the case? Does this mean two people taken at random can't have a conversation? Well, we tend to come from societies where social behaviour has become normalised into something that doesn't end up in murder each time they meet, each time people meet. And the less civilised amongst us, I suppose, tend to breach some of these norms more often than others, and perhaps end up in more arguments and fights than others, which is counterproductive. For instance, I mean, you might be extremely right because you're the expert on, say, in my case, economics. I'm supposed to be the expert, aren't I? I'm qualified and experienced, and I'm called an economist, etc. And I might be talking to someone who's a mathematician with the same sort of justified reason for calling him a mathematician. They're both relatively well equipped in their subject area, but far from that meaning that there will necessarily be a meeting of minds. It could actually mean that there is no way these two can have a meeting of minds, because there's something fundamental about their experience, probably from the very learning ability itself in the study of maths and the study of economics, that may put them at odds with each other. All sorts of background assumptions about the nature of what's rational and what's important, and, if you like, what is acceptable in their domains. Well, more importantly, what I'm saying is that we don't start from a level playing field ever. It's people with different backgrounds and their uniqueness coming together, and the sort of religious, or spiritual anyway, religion perhaps, the spiritual in terms of the real world, societies and law and order and all that sort of thing, spiritual perhaps in some more sort of theoretic notion of what some ideal heaven might be, which might be quite different to the ideal state, worldly government or something, because, worldly governments and so on deal with all sorts of things that might not be in heaven, like, I don't know, evil intent, say. We're assuming heaven's going to be a place of no evil intent. It's all been chucked out or not allowed in. So the ideal religion for earth might not be the same as the ideal spiritual state for heaven. Because being in the world, shortness of duration of life, uncertainty, everything changing, good, bad, matter and space and time and so on, puts constraints on that might not be in some idealized view of heaven. Now, the secular person presumably won't have heaven in mind. He will have an ideal in mind. It's not that he's without values, for goodness sake. It's just that his values are, as he understands it from his experience, appropriate to his experience in this world. The religious person might be taking a value system that is heavily charged by not just his experience, but his experience in the light of a value system presented by a certain religion or scripture and so forth. And I might want to define a spiritual person as someone who's trying to get away from the limitations of the right view being specifically in this world for this world, but from the point of view of some ideal state. Now, of course, my view of the ideal state comes from my experience, good and bad, in this world. So that's unique to each of us. Yeah. I was reminded, having just emerged about a quarter of an hour ago, from an argument with my friend who's a mathematician, where in the end I couldn't get a word in edgeways because, well, the argument had gone too far really, and I was trying to escape through the door, which was unusual because usually when we're together, we accept somehow differences in each other, but at the same time listen to what those differences are. But because you can find that some differences are unacceptable to you. I mean, to either party. I mean, if he had, he didn't, don't get me wrong, but I mean, if he had wanted to, launch into, if you like, a blasphemous, swearing, defamation of the whole notion of God, then of course I would have wanted to step away. He didn't do that, of course. Don't get me wrong. I think he accused me of holding a philosophical view at some point instead of a realistic view, and he felt that mathematics was realistic, and I was throwing fuel on the fire by pointing out that maths is understood to be an art, not a science, and that a science is different to maths in that it's understood that you have a theory and then you go out and you check it with the real world. You never check maths with the real world as such. You do when you apply it to physics and so on, but the maths is still right. There's a rationality that determines maths from the axioms that you start from. And that it was, in fairness to him, he came back at me and said, "Oh, you're just taking a philosophical thing," and he wanted to dismiss it probably because philosophy has not meant anything like as much as maths has meant to him in helping him live and understand and cope with life. Yeah. So I should be able to just understand that, accept that, and disengage. Just say, well, can we just leave the argument? There's just, if you like, we agree to differ. I think this is the beauty, and I've said it before, haven't I, of YouTube, is that you disengage. You're watching something, you think, oh no, this isn't quite what I appreciate and value, and you can't convince the YouTube video that your view is right and theirs is wrong. You just flip out of it, and you go on to something that's more in harmony and what you feel is rewarding to watch and spend your time and application on, This is rather wonderful, isn't it? Whereas in human contact, if I'm confronted with the chap who's giving the lecture and I argue with him and he argues back, and, do you come out of the room better off? You might do. It might be quite rewarding in that, but you just as often might not, and what you said wasn't really heard, and then someone else asked something else anyway, and the whole thing got misinterpreted, and it goes from bad to worse. So from the point of view of your progress as you see it and what you value, you're much better off not in direct human contact, but simply being given an available menu, which of course is what YouTube does, doesn't it? I mean, it's a bit hard to see what is in the video before you absolutely open it. You know, you may be persuaded by the title that this is just what would fascinate you, and when you get into it you find, oh no, this is not me at all, and you just flick out. You know, the disadvantage of the church sermon, you couldn't walk out without, oh, what's wrong with him? Doesn't he agree with this? Shouldn't he agree with it? Is he a good member of the church or not? And was it insulting to walk out when the chap was still talking? He hadn't finished his sermon, and so it goes on, you see. Whereas if you're in a library or if you're flitting through the web, you pick and you choose and you go down a certain road, and that might be rewarding, and then you're surprised that so-and-so is helpful, and then you look it further, and then and so it goes on. Yeah. So, I've argued strongly in the past, haven't I, that groups are a menace to talk to publicly because everybody hears what you're saying differently, and in particular, sometimes absurdly differently to what you think you were saying. That's not what they've heard at all. Or they've taken objection to something that you didn't realise you did say. I suppose I did say that in as many words, but what I mean is, but they've gone off with what they understood it to mean and judge you accordingly. So, well, is it that interaction with other persons is never a good idea? Oh no. Interaction with persons that have a similar bent and view and values and goals to you is just wonderful. And ideally we see friendships like that. If they really have totally different interests, well, they don't do things together. And if they don't do things together, even eat, in the end, they're not really in relationship, they part. So, we have a notion that in heaven, it would be wonderful if in some sense, we are all in harmony with each other. Does that mean all have the same values? Could do, depending how we define values, but yeah, I suspect that might be the case. But there must be some sort of harmony where we still gain tremendous blessing and benefit by sharing with each other and relating and communing with each other. And I think what we are basically learning here in this world is about how to possibly achieve this. What to do and what not to do. And simple thing like, well, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So, and I don't want to be forceful in the wrong sense in argument. I want to be logically consistent, but I don't want to browbeat my audience or drive them with a guilt thing or a fear thing where they think they won't be acceptable if they have such and such a view. There are rules to engagement, and I think that's what we're trying to find out what they are. What do you think? Bless you. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.